Hello, and welcome back to another episode for Project Seed Money. I am so excited that you are here. I'm your host, Sharissa Bradley, and I am joined today with author Cheydrea. And I am so excited that she decided to join me on this interview, and I cannot wait for you to hear about her writing process.
Welcome, Andrea. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for being here. We are super, super excited to have you share your encouragement with our community. We are trying to build up female authors here, and you reached out to us kind of out of we hadn't even met before. So this feels very incredible and organic. And thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you.
Let's just jump right in. Do you want to first start by sharing if you have any specific experience with writing, if you met any specific challenges along the way of your writing journey? If you want to start there.
I will say that, like a lot of writers, I loved writing when I was younger. I kept journals, but the writing process for me currently, it was kind of unexpected. It was very unexpected. So I was teaching yoga online during the pandemic for free. I was a yoga teacher in a studio. And I just started to write about my life. And pretty quickly, it got ugly. And it was like I was hemorrhaging all over the place. And it was hard to look at. There was a lot of shame. There was a lot of embarrassment. And I tried to reject it. I was rejecting myself, rejecting my words. And so I started to distract myself. And I went out and got a really physical job because that's how I dealt with a lot of things. And then I ended up tearing my rotator cuff and back into a chair I was and started writing again. So writing found me. I didn't go out seeking for it. And it just got a little bit worse and worse. But that being said, this is what I say to people is there was a voice inside of me. And now I know it was my inner child that needed to speak. And she pushed me out of the way and she took over everything. And I now tell people she took over the manuscript, but I didn't even know what a manuscript was. So I just was writing and writing and writing. And what ended up happening was, and there were stages of it because I couldn't handle what was happening. So I started doing art. And I was taking art classes and I was smearing paint all over the place. And just really, those were my moments or weeks or months of a respite so that I could regulate my nervous system, if you will, through the writing process. And then I go back to the writing. But eventually, in order to understand my words, I organically and intuitively turned them into poetry. And so it just started to become poetry. And my book now is a hybrid of little stories that my inner child was telling, things I never said, very painful, raw things, some poetry, a lot of poetry, some quotes, a lot of stuff. A really good example of a first time book, if you will. And then again, a lot of swinging back and forth from art to poetry or to writing to art to writing. I was in a lot of different courses. I learned how to do really cool things with art. I learned how talented I was with art too. We're all artists. We're all creative. We all know how to write. We all have a voice. We just have to believe that that's possible and just go with it and make a mess, make a huge mess all over the pages, all whether it's painting or words or whatever. Then my daughter encouraged me. She said, "You got to make a book out of this." And anyways, it was a 2.5 year process.
Because sometimes that's what it's going to take. And for most people, I think the idea is, oh, I'm going to have this book and I'm going to write my stories. And sometimes it comes out quickly, but then there's these breaks and these pauses in between, which creates a lot more time. And that can get discouraging. Can you speak to that a little bit? When you were in that 2.5 year period, were there moments of like, this is not ever going to be anything?
Yeah, and I didn't even know if I wanted it to be anything. And that's so common. And now I realize I'm learning things now that when you're outside of it looking in, you're like, oh, okay. But yeah, there was 3 or 4 or 5 times where I said, I'm not going to make a book out of this. This is just for me. But my daughter was very encouraging, and she's young. She's in her 20s, but she was very encouraging because my children saw me go through life and said, you deserve to speak on these things. But you're not sure of yourself. And so I say, just keep going. And you don't have to publish your book, but when you look back at all the stuff that you've done, sometimes you just have to trust yourself and you have to say, I deserve to share this, even though it may not seem like it's anything. Because at first, I was like, well, my story's not anything special. But now I look back and I was like, holy wow. Like I have so much compassion for myself now and so much compassion for my younger me and so much compassion for people now. Like every story, anybody tells a story now and I'm feeling it, even though it's not my story. So in that process, you do stop and then you pick it back up and you do stop and you pick it back up. Yeah. And that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's okay. That's the best part of that. And that is okay
Yeah.
because that's I think part of the healing process is that we can kind of open up the wounds, but then we have to work to heal that before we
Mhm.
can open up the next wounds. And maybe for you, that was taking the time to do art. And maybe for our listeners or people who are watching, maybe that's a different thing entirely. Maybe it's building a car or learning how to make sourdough bread, whatever that break is that brings in a little, it's almost like a little wound and then like a little healing.
Yeah, and while you're doing that, while you're making the sourdough bread, or for me, I was a restorative yoga teacher, so I was doing yoga. Whatever you're doing, that is when a lot of the insight will come in. When I take my breaks and I was doing art or cooking or whatever, I also had notebooks everywhere and I'm scratching notes and the stuff that would ruminate for decades was now being purged out of me. And there was papers everywhere, but it still counted. So, like I said again, make a mess and then you'll put it all back together again. And I say that in my book, just make a mess of everything because then you're going to be putting all the pieces back together, the puzzles of your life. And then in the end, it'll be like, I did this.
Yeah. And that's, I think, what we have to do. Even Marie Kondo tells you throw it all on the bed and then put it all away one by one. But what you got to see the whole mess, right? It's like we have to see it all outside before we can even make any kind of sense of it.
Or it's like a knot that you're just kind of peeling, you're trying to get all the threads apart and then you get it all laid out or something like that. There's a lot of analogies you could use.
I can see it though, and I appreciated that analogy. As a sewist myself, I was imagining the threads coming apart and then going, oh, okay, now this is the blue thread. And this is the red thread.
Yeah.
It can't be that until we start to see it as a mess and start to untangle the mess.
And
I love
sometimes you grab scissors and just cut the knot. Because you're like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes you just gotta cut it. Oh my gosh, that was really funny. Goodness. Okay, how do we set this? We've got these people, they're on the edge. They want to write their story, right? Maybe they've been collecting the journals. Maybe they've been writing these little snippets down. Maybe it has been kind of pouring out of them. But there is still lots of fear. There's fears around what will people think? And there's fears around what will happen to me when I'm that vulnerable, right? So, what happened to you and your experience when you did publish and you did come out and you were in that state of vulnerability where people were then seeing that side and being able to reflect that back? Can you speak to that a little?
so I just published 2 weeks ago. So, so
Congratulations.
thank you. And I am in the top 100 of new releases in all of my categories because I did a lot of research and I did a lot of learning before I hit that publish button. But to answer your question, I am estranged from my family because of this book. And that's a whole nother podcast. I do hope that someday we can reconcile at some point. But when I expressed to people that I was writing or that I was going through this grief, because really what I learned is that while I was writing, I was grieving. And it was a deep grief. And it was grief for my inner child. I wouldn't have been able to put that to words when I was writing, but I wasn't able to put words to anything. I didn't even know what was happening to me, really. Like I said, writing found me. And so when I tried to explain this to family members and loved ones, they abandoned me in the grief. And so that being said, and I can say all this now without crying. I mean, I can read my book now without crying, but I read my book so many times, my pages, and I just bawled. And so I was in grief, and people will abandon you in your grief. They will abandon you when you change, when you start to speak your truth, when you start to say things that you don't think you should say. It put my marriage on the hot seat. I mean, I've been married 30 years. I have 2 kids. There was a lot of growth. There was a lot of purging, like I said, a lot of hemorrhaging, a lot of growth. And in growth and in change and in finding our voice and transforming into a different person through writing, people will not be there because they are used to who we once were. So writing will transform a person. But I don't sit in the shower anymore and rock back and forth in anxiety. I trust myself now. I love myself now. So I hope that I'm answering that question. I do get off, but you do quickly find who will be there for you. And I write that. That's like one of my second or third last pages of my book, where I give credit to the people who stuck by me as I peeled myself apart. And you're not your best self when you're grieving. You're angry, you're resentful, you're feeling these things. I felt jealousy for the first time in my life. I was never jealous of anyone. I felt jealousy. I felt all these things. It was shameful. And I told people. And so there will be people that will come, and you learn what a safe space is. You learn who's there for you and who's not. And now I realize that a lot of people just don't have the bandwidth to support people while they're writing and while they're sharing. But for me, if you want to save your life, if you want to heal yourself from whatever it is you're trying to heal from, then you have to be willing to let things go. And that means people too, and old versions of yourself and material items and things. You just have to do a lot of healing while you're writing. You can't just write, like we mentioned earlier. You've got to infuse other things in there. Follow some psychologists on social media. I got a good list of ones that I follow faithfully, and keep that going while you're writing.
That's really beautiful. And I'm really grateful that you shared this. Just this morning in my inbox, I received a message of a woman who said that she's really wanting to share her story, but her fear is the backlash from her family. And she's already tried to share a little bit and experienced that abandonment from her own healing. And my response to her was, sometimes you do lose those people, right? It's one of the hardest things. I mean, like you said, you can talk about it now without crying about it, but these are our natural connections. To disconnect from them causes pain and abandonment and suffering. It's a big thing. And that in and of itself can take years.
My family has benefited, my little family, my children and their relationships that they're having now. And my husband and I mean, we're in a different kind of a marriage now. It's not a survival marriage. We're not just trying to survive. And so there is a meadow of flowers after you crawl out of the cave. And it's not going to happen on your time. It's going to happen when your healing decides that it's time. And that makes me choke up saying it, because it can last a while. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's dark and it is scary. And it does help to have those people that will stick by you. I feel that at Project Seed Money, we are trying to build a community of women who are coming together because we did have to separate from these relationships. Where do we find that sense of community? We're hoping to build it here because it is women like you and like the women who are watching this, right, to make their own stories come to life, that they're wondering who's going to hold my hand. And we want to be that group for people. I feel that a lot of comfort is going to come even just from what you've already shared. I'm really, really grateful that you gave us this time and this space. And I do want to take one opportunity to just ask you to share where people can find you, your book. Where can people find more about you? Because it does seem like you have a lot more to offer than even just this encouragement you've given so far.
I decided after I published that I'm ready to speak. So that's the next stage, is I'm ready to talk. My website, which is beautiful, I've been putting it together for 2 years. And what it is, it's my daughter's name and my name. So my daughter's named Cheyenne, and it's Chey, which is the first part of her name. And then the last part of my name, which is Andrea, which is Drea. So it's Cheydrea, CheydRea.com. And I have everything about me there, my books, I have a sample of my book. I have my about pages and just everything's there. And my book's on Amazon. It's been there for a couple of weeks. And I'm just going to keep going forward and probably write another book.
Absolutely. That is so beautiful. And I do hope you get another opportunity to write more and just continue that journey. It seems like it will continue to find you. And we're really grateful for your time. I'll make sure to link everything in the description box below so that it's easy for everybody to just click to find out more about you.
And how else can I support you guys?
This is the best thing, really, I think, because I'm just going to continue to encourage and support and, try to find more women to be part of our community that are writers. It's that barrier. It's that when we get to that place of like, I know I'm going to write this book, but we just can't cross it. That's what I'm really hoping to help women with here, because we all deserve that opportunity. We all deserve that opportunity to have all of the things that we think are the worst parts really showered in love. And we all deserve that. So, really, that's my purpose for being here. And I feel that you have given already so much to the
Oh,
community.
well, thank you for taking time with me. And I hope to see you again.
I love it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for coming to our YouTube channel, and thank you for watching another interview with us. We are so glad that you are here. Please don't forget to like and subscribe so that you never miss an interview. And we will see you next week. Bye.